Well, the next two segments will be interrelated, right? So the previous one we dealt with early Israelite history, really, right? The question of the patriarchs, right? With the ultimate conclusion that it really does seem that the Middle Bronze Age is a fitting and historically plausible setting for the narratives, especially of Joseph and the sons of Israel moving into Egypt, and probably earlier as well in terms of the context of the trade routes, the routes of communication for Abraham and the others. We're going to fast forward to take a look at traditional views on the kingdom of David and Solomon. I don't mean to hide from the story of the Exodus. I only have so much time, and my own research has particularly been focused on the early and middle Bronze Age and the Iron Age. So, as a bit of an apology, there's fascinating stuff. I'm delighted to talk to you about questions about the historical Exodus, but for the sake of time, let's talk about David and Solomon. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about traditional views. The second segment I will mention, relatively recent, is in the late 1990s. Oh boy, that's not that recent anymore. Challenges to this paradigm, right? Particularly a new low chronology that was proposed from the excavators of Megiddo, and then we'll comment on that in the third section based on a little bit of insight from the sites that we are working on actively in the Tel El-Hesi region. So in terms of contextualizing David and Solomon, right, it needs to start with just getting Israel into Palestine. So I'll very rapidly cover the end of the late Bronze Age. So I said at the end of the Hyksos period, it didn't end well for the Hyksos. The Egyptians were mad. They conquered the Hyksos and Canaan all the way up to the borders with Syria, and they basically just made Canaan Egypt. Right, so for majority of the late Bronze Age period up until about the year 1177 BC, the area is under complete hegemony by Egypt. We have fascinating accounts from the father of King Tut, Akhenaten, the Amarna letters, talking about these petty Canaanite overlords working with the pharaoh. The situation changes following the invasion of people called the Sea Peoples. Right, so they're a coalition, a broad coalition of numerous tribes from different parts of the Mediterranean world that begin mass militaristic migrations across the Aegean and across the Middle East. This combines with environmental degradation, drought, to shake the late Bronze Age world to its core. Egypt and their great rivals, the Hittites in modern-day Turkey, are unable to cope with the combined invasions, environmental changes, and these civilizations withdraw. The Hittite Empire collapses into small sub-states. Egypt retreats within its own borders. You see, for example, Egypt itself fighting for its very life against coalitions of people from the sea. Right? This is a depiction from the Medinet Habu mortuary temple of Ramses III, who claims to defeat this great coalition in 1177. Following this defeat, among the different names of the peoples, we have identified one as the Pelistet, one of these numerous tribes of the Pelistet. These are likely the biblical Philistines. Right? So who are the Philistines? Right? If you look at the biblical text, they are arch nemesis of ancient Israel. They settle on the coastal plain. They create their own Pentapolis, that is the 5 great cities of the Philistines, and they oppose the Israelites tooth and nail through most of the Old Testament narrative. So based on that sort of Egyptian consideration, the Egyptian evidence, it seems that at least the Philistines are where they should be by about 11... Well, that's a lot of debates with that. 1177 to 1135. Somewhere in there, the Philistines are setting up shop in Israel. What about the Israelites themselves? Right, in terms of looking at archaeological artifacts that really help point and ground scriptural data, this is among the most important. This is the Merneptah Stele. Merneptah Stele is a record of a campaign waged by the pharaoh Merneptah against Canaanite sites in about the year 1208 BC. Most important line in all of this I've underlined here, right? Well, the pharaoh is bragging about all the societies he's kicked and all the goods he got and all the people he killed. He says, Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. This is the first reference that we see in Egyptian literature to the name Israel found outside of the biblical text. If you look at the geography of his conquest, right, the pharaoh actually recorded this in order. Like the people that he thwallops are actually recounted in geographical order. And where the Israelites are located, they are supposed to be, according to the pharaoh, in the hill country of Israel by 1208. Where did they come from? A lot of questions with these, right? But basically, there's some good archaeological evidence of ethnicity, right? What sort of markers do we see among the Proto-Israelites? Particular architecture, something called a four-room house. Really, they're using space in a unique manner that is very different from the Philistines, that is different from the local Canaanites, different from the Egyptians, etc. Their settlement patterns, right? Their pottery, which is very plain. You do not see images of Osiris, images of me doing this, right? Like none of that you find on this particular type of Israelite pottery. They have collar-rimmed store jars, right? Particular material culture, and generally speaking, their sites are completely devoid of pork, right? These tend to be the ethnic markers for the development of what archaeologists would identify as Proto-Israel. Fast forwarding to the development of that Israel into a kingdom, the biblical text notes that around and shortly before the year 1000 BC, this Proto-Israelite nation that is described in the book of Judges and Joshua as a tribal coalition, so they're descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, banded together in a loose confederation. With my students, I compare it, if they come from like an American history background, sort of like the Iroquois. If you're familiar with the Iroquois Confederation, there's a bunch of tribes out on the Great Lakes region, right, that's sort of allied together during a particular time of war with European colonists, and then sort of continued to do their own tribal things. Reasonable assumption for what's happening for the Israelites at this period as well. But starting in this particular time period, toward the late Iron I period, into the transition of what's called the Iron IIA period, the biblical account notes that the Israelites have a major development in their governmental complexity. They elect a king to rule over all of these 12 tribes, and that king is named as Saul, right? Ultimately, Saul has a falling out with the God of the Israelites, with the prophet Samuel, and so you are left with the two great biblical kings, David and Solomon. Right, they are described together as reigning over a unified monarchy of all 12 tribes, from Dan to Beersheba, and then beyond to the great river, that is, to the Euphrates. Their co-rule is known to early archaeologists as the United Monarchy of David and Solomon. It is affiliated with particular markers in the archaeological record. This is red-slipped, hand-burnished pottery. That's one of the key markers of this particular period. Particular monumental fortification efforts at sites throughout Palestine are noted by early scholars, going back to Albright, for example, William Foxall Albright, as related to the reigns of David and Solomon. Right, and this paradigm continued more or less unchallenged into the 1990s. Right, when the question of David and Solomon was challenged pretty profoundly by what's called the low chronology. I will talk about the low chronology in the final segment, but some of the evidence that those who would defend a traditional chronology is what I will summarize here. Right, so recognize that this is a controversial topic, and we will cover the other side, right, in due time. So what evidence do scholars muster for the existence of a unified monarchy in Palestine at this time? Examples from the city of Jerusalem, right? According to the biblical text, Jerusalem was not conquered by the 12 tribes in their initial incursion. It remained steadfast in the hands of a tribe known as the Jebusites. It is only thanks to the efforts of King David that this Jebusite Jerusalem is brought under the control of the Israelites, and savvy king that he is, David elects to set his capital at Jerusalem. This is probably pretty savvy for a tribal leader. Why? David was not devoid of tribal identity. Right? David was a descendant of the biblical tribe of Judah. If he chose to make Bethlehem his capital, he has just showed favoritism to his own tribe. Probably not going to end well if he's trying to rule over 12 tribes, not just his own family. Right? So Jerusalem was a reasonable neutral site from which to govern. Right? At the site of the citadel of the city of David, right, so-called excavations in Jerusalem, there's the, in the biblical text, this repairing of the Milo, right, a monumental structure mentioned in the reign of Solomon. Right? Are we dealing with an area in Jerusalem that could have been palatial, could have been royal? This is just outside of the precinct of the Temple Mount. Maybe. I mean, the area clearly has something that is not typical of Israelite architecture. The question has been raised by numerous scholars whether a part of David's palace has been recovered. This is a Aeolic Proto-Ionic capital, right? So if you're familiar with like banks all around, tend to have like big Greek-style columns. These are not particularly common among the Israelites, but it would be indicative of a very wealthy palatial-type structure. Is it David's? I can't prove it to you, but it dates to the proper period. The most famous thing that David and Solomon are recorded as having done, right? If you say like, okay, what did David do? He fought and killed a lot of people, right? That is most of David's reign is spent fighting. This is not a particularly peaceful time. David has a warlike streak, right? It even disqualifies him from building the temple of God in Jerusalem, right? He desires to do this, and it is told to him through one of the court prophets, it is not proper for you to do this, right? Rather, it should fall to your son. The greatest achievement of Solomon in the biblical text is the construction of the Temple of Solomon, the center of the cult of the biblical Hebrews. If you look at the plan of the Temple of Solomon, a tripartite division of antechamber, main hall, holy of holies, it does indeed have very plausible historical parallels from precisely this period. You have examples from Syria, especially, that match this pretty well. In terms of the general design. So was Solomon building a temple to Baal? Probably not, but was he using common styles of architecture that were shared between the Syrians, the Phoenicians, and the Israelites during this time period? That does seem to be plausible. Do we have archaeological evidence for the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem? We do not. The Temple Mount itself is still considered a sacred and holy site. Excavation is strictly prohibited. It is currently operating as the Dome of the Rock, an Islamic holy site in the center of Jerusalem. So excavations on the Temple Mount are a big no-no. That's not coming anytime soon. But in the New Testament era, King Herod, the great builder, and also the guy in the Gospel of Matthew who tries to kill Jesus, right? Not a great memory there. He does reconstruct the temple in Jerusalem on a monumental scale, potentially obliterating any evidence we may have had in the construction of his giant temple mount. So, do we have physical evidence? No, but the literary evidence we have of Solomon's temple design matches pretty well with Iron Age temples, broadly speaking, in this area. More specifically, there is a type of architecture in Israel known as, I love it, we're so uncreative, it is a tripartite pillared building. It has 3 parts, there are pillars, and it is a building, right? What these things are is a subject of generations of controversy among biblical archaeologists. What's known about them is that they're found at a number of sites throughout biblical Israel. Here's what one of the best preserved ones looks like at Tel Dan in northern Israel. More or less exactly what the name sounds like, right? Three parts with pillars. And so the question is, what was this thing used for? What's going on? Well, traditionally, the excavators who've located these particular discoveries noted them as being constructed during the Iron IIA period. That is, they're found with evidence of this red slip hand burnished pottery, which would date them broadly to the time when the Bible places the reigns of David and Solomon. What they're doing, there was a lot of speculation. Were they marketplaces? Were they bazaars, right? And like in each of those, you'd have a stall where someone had stuff. Were they storage depots, right? They sort of look like a warehouse, right? If you're like a sketchy dockside warehouse, maybe this is something you'd see there. But relatively recently, really, really fascinating evidence has come out of these that suggests that tripartite pillared buildings, at least some of them, were used as stables for horses. And this comes from Deborah Cantrell, right, a scholar who also happens to be an equestrian. So she was very familiar with horses, and looking at some of the troughs and some of the evidence at this location, she saw evidence of cribbing. Right? It's what a bored horse does at a trough, right? So you can see some of the arrows pointing to this, right? This is something very diagnostic of what horses do. So at least some of these structures appear to be related to the maintenance of horses. What were horses used for during this period? If you look at Egyptian texts, if you look at Hittite texts from earlier periods, if you even look at the Homeric epics, right, the Iliad, the Odyssey, horses are being used primarily for chariot warfare, right? And if you look at biblical texts, David and Solomon appear to have maintained a cavalry. Solomon especially appears to have had a great interest in maintaining a chariot corps. And so could these tripartite pillared buildings be the stables for Solomon's charioteers? It is possible, right? It is something that traditional scholars continue to come back to, is at least at a couple sites, this seems to be the case. Very classically, this period has been defined, right? The Iron 2A, as affiliated with David and Solomon, has come to be defined by the presence of six-chambered gates. We really got to work on creative names, man. Right? Sometimes they're called Solomonic gates, but six-chambered gates is the one that stuck with me. It's one that's typically published. They have six chambers, and they're city gates. They are found particularly at three sites that are notable. They are found at Megiddo, they are found at Hatzor, and they are found at Gezer. Why is that significant? Citation to 1 Kings chapter 9. This was the account of the forced labor which King Solomon levied to build the house of the Lord and his own house, and the Millo and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hatzor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. Okay, so you have three examples of same type of six-chambered gate found, affiliated, at least with early scholars' claims, with this particular type of pottery that seems to date to the precise period the Bible places the reigns of David and Solomon. And here you have the biblical account naming Solomon fortifying these precise three locations. Seems to be a fairly robust argument there. What were these used for? This is thanks to my advisor for giving me this slide. I love this slide. What were they using these gates for? The hypothesis is they're six-chambered gates because they're essentially chariot parking stalls. Right? You park the horse and the chariot in there, you load up, and then you are ready to have a rapid response strike team exit the city gate at a moment's notice. These sites also were notable for having tripartite pillared buildings. So is there a connection between the gate and the tripartite pillar building? This is at least one of the hypotheses of how the chambers would have been utilized. Chariot parking stalls. Are archaeologists crazy? Maybe, probably, but I think there's at least a reasonable argument that you're using these for something like this during this period. A notable site excavated in relatively recent times that has come to really muster a good deal of evidence for this more traditional view of the kingdom of David and Solomon is a site known as Khirbet Qeiyafa. Khirbet Qeiyafa is located here by the star, close to the Vale of Elah. So the Vale of Elah is a location of great strife between the biblical Philistines and the biblical Israelites. For example, David and Goliath are recorded as battling it out in the near vicinity. So Khirbet Qeiyafa is located in this disputed zone between Philistia, the land of these Philistines, and the united monarchy's territory, right in this area. The excavations proceeded to uncover what appears to be more or less a single period iron to a fortification, a fortified site. Excavations really focused on trying to expose as much of the fortifications as possible. And located at the particular site, you have gate complexes, right, and a potential tripartite pillared building. Right, a building suitable for warfare. Based on the location of this site, would make sense that you would want fortified efforts if the Philistines are threatening your kingdom. The previous slide had also mentioned the discovery of an ostracon. Ostracon is a piece of pottery that has writing on it. The Khirbet Qeiyafa ostracon is written about 1000 BC and is quite significant because there is writing on it. There is a dearth of evidence in the kingdom of David and Solomon for physical artifacts with written Hebrew on it. Right? There's not all that much concrete physical evidence of these things, right, in terms of actually looking at the texts. This is one of those objects. The language has been, there's a lot of controversy as to what this language actually is, numerous different theories. It has been proposed to be an early form of biblical Hebrew. It is either that or some form of Proto-Canaanite. Someone said Phoenician. This seems reasonable to me that it's probably related to early biblical Hebrew. Looking at the different translations, it's amazing how many different things people can come up with. This is at least a translation of it that seems to be talking about legal texts, right, in terms of the summoning to authority. Why is it important that there's summoning to authority? There appears to be some centralized authority operating this site. makes sense if it is a military occupation zone. If you read the biblical text literally and see the exploits of David and Solomon, ultimately their control over the kingdom of Israel goes far beyond the borders of the 12 tribes' original land. David and Solomon are said to acquire an empire that stretches to the ends of the earth, if we're looking at some of the psalm literatures, or poetic exaggeration. But certainly it appears from the biblical text that David and Solomon are supposed to be not only ruling the Israelites, but having Canaanites, having other peoples in Syria, all the way up to Mesopotamia, subordinate to them. Right? They're sort of operating as an empire might be expected. And that is, David and Solomon are establishing a monarchy, a dynasty, that is also an imperial power in the Middle East at this time. Why did I bring up the context of the Sea Peoples, the collapse of Egyptian control, the collapse of Hittite control in Turkey? What's the point? Well, if David and Solomon have a militaristic power in the Levant at this time, there really aren't that many other games in town that could stop them. So, sure, they could make it all the way to the Euphrates. Are they directly governing every single person there? You don't have to if you just say, hey, pay up or we're going to come get you. And you have the chariots. Yes, sir. Right? So this is at least one of the traditional answers you get of, we don't have evidence of Israelites ruling in the Euphrates River basin. But given the fact that Egyptian control has collapsed, the Hittites are nowhere to be found, David appears to be quite the skilled warrior, it's quite possible that you could exert military influence from the Levant out to these areas at the time. We do know, at least from the 9th century, that the House of David is a known political entity. So this is the Tel Dan inscription, found again at the site of Tel Dan near the 9th century gate. And it mentions the king of Israel and the king of the house of David, the Beit David, right? So the king, this is from Hazael. He's a king of Damascus who's coming and killing a bunch of Israelites, conquering a bunch of areas, and then setting up a big monument praising himself. And he says that he's defeated these particular kings. Significant that you see the name of David and you see the name of his imperial power listed as Beit David. Right, so this is an imperial entity, at least one that is known to other powers in the Middle East about 100 years after the fact. In terms of their economic control, right, there's been fascinating recent work done in the Timna Valley. So this is one of the copper-producing areas, really, really copper-rich zones in the Great Rift Valley. So where the Dead Sea is, you can see that on this map. What's really happening here, this is the same Rift Valley that you can follow down into Eastern Africa, right? You have the splitting of plate tectonics. Well, in this splitting, you get amazing geological formations that show up, and it just so happens in the extreme south of modern-day Israel, on the border, close to the border with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, this area, you have very fine copper deposits. What is happening during the 10th century BC is an absolute renaissance of mining. Thousands of metric tons of copper is being excavated at this precise time period from the mines at Timna. Right? You end up with whole tunnels, right? Whole operations of trying to extract these resources and then prepare them for transport. Right? So the question becomes, what are these things being used for? Why do you need thousands of metric tons of copper in the extreme south of the deserts of Palestine? So the question, traditional-minded scholars would sort of rephrase it, is it possible that David and Solomon controlled this region? Right? Or were they trading with people that did? Right? Is this a cartel of interrelated tribes, the Israelites and their buddies? The Edomites are the ones that are suggested as in control of the Timna area. Are they somehow collaborating? Have we located King Solomon's mines? Right? Like, probably not the way you think about it in like the movies or whatnot, but nonetheless, you do have an astounding amount of copper manufacture for export. And copper remained one of the important metals. Even though we're technically in the Iron Age, copper was still vital. Bronze was still used. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, we're in the Iron Age, better, toss all of our technological knowledge about copper. It was still a very vital commodity. And so it very easily could explain the wealth that the Bible attributes to David and Solomon if they are in control of some sort of trade system linking different tribes south into Saudi Arabia, north all the way into Syria and the Levant. This continues. I promised the camel. So I'm going to talk to you about the camel. I promised the camel would make an appearance again. And so here's the camel. I think, at least it is my opinion, that the camel is vital to understanding the kingdom of David and Solomon. Proudly displayed in my classroom is a book titled Camels in the Biblical World. Right, very, very niche. But I think it really is vital to unlocking what exactly is happening in this system. And this comes back to the first book of Kings, chapter 10. That is the account of the visit of the Queen of Sheba to the court of King Solomon. Sheba is a location that appears to have been in southern Yemen, right, so South Arabia. What is located down in South Arabia? Well, Sabbatean civilization, so there is a culture down there. But more important even than the development of some of the civilizations here contemporary with Israel, this area is famous for frankincense forests, right? Incense is among the most valuable commodities in the ancient world. The Roman Empire, for example, required metric tons of the stuff. It is used for everything from medicine to perfume to actual incense used in religious offerings. So it's something in later texts that is quite expensive. Pure frankincense is a luxury commodity. The camel is domesticated around 1000 BC, and it enables trans-Arabian trade from the frankincense forests of southern Yemen all the way up the coast through the Hijaz, the location of Mecca and Medina, right, the cities that would become important in later Islamic traditions, all the way up to Palestine. So the question is there evidence of trade between Israel and Sheba? Certainly there is a limited amount of evidence, but we do have some. There is a sherd from the city of David that is an incense urn, and it is inscribed probably in the language of Sheba, that is Sabbatean. We also, it's always with the beads, right? I studied beads in my dissertation. I think they can tell us a lot about culture. I've actually been very, very blessed and grateful to look at some beads from excavations associated with the kingdom of Sheba. And there are wide traditions of manufacture shared from that region that do seem to show trade connections going north. Agate beads seem to have been coming from Arabia as well as India, right? And then all the way up the coast, you may even have some things coming from elsewhere. So you have wonderful sites located, right? The so-called palaces of the Queen of Sheba. Many of these date from the 8th century, later periods. But what is certain about this particular kingdom is that it flourishes based on incense trade, not just during this period, but really beginning to kick into high gear in the 10th century BC, right? So the proposition that would advance from a sort of traditional understanding of the kingdom of David and Solomon is, at least from my perspective, they're a trading empire. Right? What enables the success, the thriving of this particular group is the command and control of economic networks, right? It's who you know. And if David and Solomon were able to connect with individuals in the Horn of Africa and in southern Arabia, they have access not only to the gold of the other side of the Red Sea and in Africa, but also this precious commodity of incense, especially because of their control of the camel, right? So there is a camel from a wonderful British museum piece. That is an incense burner. It has Sabbatean writing, it's an incense burner, and it has a camel on it. I assign my students a bunch of artifacts to memorize. This is one. I think I had a student in the audience, right? You're prepared, right, for the test, right? We talk about Sabbatean civilization. There it is, right? I think a summary of a civilization in a single object. So I think camels actually do play a great role. They're indicative of something that becomes vital to the economic well-being of the civilization of the Israelites in the 10th century BC. And it's this evidence that would convince me that the reference in Genesis, for example, is not the biblical author just straight up lying to you. It's the biblical author telling you that they were actually alive during a period when camels were vital to the economic well-being of a system of trade in the kingdom of David and Solomon.